Hello and welcome to Open Mind UFO Radio. My name is Alejandro Rojas, and I'm going to be your host today. I hope that's all right with you. It most likely is, though, because I'm always the host, and you come back. Thank you very much for doing that, because often I'm kind of silly and a bit of a goofball, but I'm getting choked up here. I'm so happy that you come back every week. You know who else comes back every week and sometimes, well, I was going to say sometimes gets me choked up. I don't know that it's gotten me choked up, but it has made me feel very warm and happy inside and grateful. And that is the fact that Martin Willis comes back. Martin Debunker Willis.
Oh, wow. That's the first time. That is definitely the first time.
You're not a debunker. I'm just kidding. That. The only reason I said that is because you had a debunker on your show last week. But here's the funny thing. I commend you for it. I think that that's awesome because it's really important. And just to give people some background, people need to go listen to Martin's show. Was it just last week?
Yes.
Wasn't it? Because you had on the guy who figured out what the Chilean Air Force or the Chilean Navy infrared video was. And at first, you know, we're like, does this guy really got it? What's going on? You were bold enough to interview the guy and talk to him and see how he came up with it. And Leslie Kane, who wrote the original story about the whole thing, came out and had other analysis by our good friend Robert Powell and others, and said, I think the Metabunk guy is right. Although she didn't use his name or reference the site, which she probably should have, because he was the first guy. You got to give credit where credit is due, and that's one thing I love about you is that you do that.
Well, thank you, man. And I did ask him the question you wanted me to ask him, and that is, why didn't he contact Sefaha before he posted his story? And basically, if someone wants to listen, I think he said something along the lines where, you know, things get lost in email. He wanted to get going on this because he saw, you know, the results were really solid. So all good. But, interesting guy.
Not only that, the other thing is there are certain terms that we shy away from that we should not shy away from. And it's one of my pet peeves in this field. And debunker is not a bad term. Now, there are debunkers who don't really care about doing anything but explaining away everything. But debunking is something we all should be doing. I regularly do that. I always call Mark D'Antonio makes fun of me for calling him a debunker, and he tries to shy away from that. But he does debunk a lot of stuff, and that is a good thing. He is able to find explanations for things that are often prosaic and not anomalous. And the reason that is so important is the same reason it's important in science, is because once you cannot explain something away, that's when it's really important. And as good researchers, just like a good scientist, you got to work as hard as possible to look for answers, because then it's much more significant when you don't have an answer.
That's right. I would call the debunkers pseudo-debunkers, the one that just make claims. And, you know, it's just there are two sides of this, of this UFO field. And one of them is, you know, the fringe side, and then one of is the pseudo-skeptic or pseudo-debunker side, you know, and then everything else kind of falls in between.
Right.
I guess we need it all because it all is a part of the functioning this thing works. But, you know, it's sort of a little bit along the lines of, and I hate to say this, probably going to get some mail about this, but a little along the line of the Roswell slides, everyone went to action and they cracked it. And,
Right.
And so I think, this is just another situation. However, I don't think there was absolutely no ill intent when it comes to this Chilean, situation. None at all. It's just that, as you would hear Mick West say, the debunker, basically that he is very, very skilled in contrails and debunking them. So that's how he got involved in this.
Mm-hmm.
He's been studying it for years. And so that's where he started.
Well, I did an interview last night or the other night, it's going to air tonight, with Greg Bishop, Radio Mysterio. He's one of the speakers for the Congress. He's a pilot. And he looked very closely, and it was fun talking to him because he talked in detail about some of the things he looked at, aeronautical maps, stuff like this, at no-fly zones. He technically knows a lot more about communicating with the tower and all of these things I wouldn't know about. So it was interesting, and he had come to the same conclusion that he felt that the metabug thing was correct in his own research. Yeah, that's something important that we all need to do. You and I get excited about some of these videos we talk about and think they look weird because we can't figure out what they may be. But many, if not all of them, could be explainable. We all make mistakes. We all have different expertise, and there's no doubt there are at least 2 or 3 cases that I've taken to people such as Mark and said, "Come on, dude, this is the real deal." And then they sit down and explain how I'm wrong in terms I can understand. And then I feel like, oh, not again. And then I got to get Mark in a headlock and give him a noogie. But,
well, I got to tell you, he's sharp, and I want to make a case in point. On the way to Phoenix, a long drive to Phoenix, we were going along the desert, and my girlfriend snapped a picture just out the window at the desert landscape. Well, she sent me the picture, and there's this perfect disc-shaped thing in the sky. And I go, you got to be kidding me. I think I may even forwarded this to you. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. But when I got to the conference, Mark D'Antonio was there. And I said, hey, Mark, check this out. And so he's looking at it really closely for a second. He goes, I think you might have something on your window. So I looked at the picture really closely, and I said, how the heck would you ever, where are you getting this? So I went out to the car, and I looked on the window, and there was a little tiny speck of grass that looked like, if you hold yourself back a little bit, it looks like the disc. That's exactly
what he does. It's infuriating, that little son of a gun. He bursts our bubble. Yeah, that's a perfect example. So, here's to the real debunkers and debunking, and not the pseudo debunkers.
You go.
They're bad. But I even like some of them, to be honest. Like Robert Schaefer. He comes to the conference every year. He writes a thing where he talks crap about all of our speakers, including myself. Actually, he's pretty nice with me because I usually am not making bombastic claims. But he'll poke holes and stuff like that. But you know what? It's brave of him to come to the conference every year, and he does make a lot of valid points. He's a bit of a pseudo debunker because he makes a lot of invalid points. Things like. Although, let's say the Phoenix Lights, maybe there is some sort of earthly explanation, but it was not A-10 Warthogs, which are like the loudest aircraft in the sky flying over these people's heads and them not knowing what it was. So stuff like that is a little silly. But,
you have your time right now to get him back.
Yeah. So he will, I'm sure he's going to be at the conference again. I think he even told me so. So. Let's see what else. For today, we've got, speaking of debunking, on the show today we are debunking everybody's favorite case, Roswell, with one of the most eminent researchers. Maybe, dare I say, my favorite researcher when it comes to Roswell. And I have a lot of favorites. I love a lot of these Roswell researchers. But I really like Kevin Randall, who is our speaker today. And we're not really completely debunking Roswell. However, what I love about Kevin is that he is, he's honest and painfully so, brutally honest to himself and to others. And I think a lot of times when it comes to Roswell research, people or other research, people get relationships. They feel for the witnesses, and so then they're less. They don't scrutinize what the content of what these witnesses are saying sufficiently. And so that's what Kevin Randle has done. He's gotten a lot of flack lately because Robert Schaefer and others have said Kevin Randle is changing his tunes in Roswell. He doesn't buy Roswell. Not true at all. And when I saw these stories, I noticed not one of these people is referencing Kevin Randle's actual words, nor have they asked him his thoughts. So I went to Kevin's site and I found a blog where he said, well, everybody's saying I recanted Roswell. Here's what I actually feel. And so I brought him on the show to talk about those things. And he does talk about how some of the witnesses kind of have holes in their stories or have changed their stories. Or in some cases, they found to be out and out inaccurate or untruthful. And so taking a step back, the case is not as strong as he had once thought. However, he certainly feels there is still a mystery, unlike what these stories are implying. And so we'll talk in details about some of the most well-known witnesses and claims. And this was a great conversation. I was on the Paracast last week. I've been doing a lot of shows to help promote the conference. And I love the Paracast with Chris O'Brien and Gene. And they were kind of saying, this is Roswell closed. We're closing the book on Roswell. We had Kevin on, and that's what we did last week. And I was like, I don't think you can ever really close the book on Roswell. And I talk about that with Kevin. But an example being, we've talked a lot about Tom DeLonge, and he mentioned in these Podesta emails, I have exciting news that way too. He mentioned in these Podesta emails that, he's been talking to one of the generals who is in charge of the labs that Tom DeLonge says, because he must believe this, got the material from the craft that crashed at Roswell. He even implies in a Facebook posting that this guy may have told him that we have an alien body, that we retrieved a body. So, I mean, what's up with that? So there's an example that here's a new avenue of investigation, something that may or may not produce anything, but something to look at. So Roswell's not dead, and I don't know that it'll be quite some time, I think, till it's completely dead. I think. What do you think?
I think, and I've mentioned this before in my show, that I think as time goes on, can you imagine if we don't have any solid evidence? It kills me to say this, but say in 100 years, if we don't have any solid evidence, as if it's just status quo the way things are now, where Roswell would have mystified and morphed, you just don't know what it's going to be like. All the research is gone in some books, and you're there every July, so you see what goes basically, and it just becomes more and more of a type of an event and mystified. Mm-hmm. So, but I do think definitely that I just think it's just too much just to shrug the whole thing off. I'm going to be interested. I had Kevin on recently, but we didn't really focus on Roswell, so I'm definitely going to listen to the show. And Kevin is definitely one of my very, very favorite people in the field. And he also has a show now, too, which I really enjoy listening to.
Yeah, he does. He's got a podcast out, and he's great. Speaking of which, before I get back to this big news, I'll start the news. Sorry, I know usually let you do that, but I wanted to mention another show I've been on recently is Global Newsmaker with Focus with Patrice Sheridan. So everybody can go check that out. That's Global Newsmaker Focus with Patrice Sheridan. You can go Google that. She's on KGRA, I believe. But she's great. She's been coming to the conference for many years. In fact, she came to, I think, my very first UFO gathering I put together in Colorado like nearly 20 years ago. And she's like from the East Coast or something. And I was shocked because this was kind of a local Denver thing I was doing. And she came all across the country to come see some of these speakers. We had some great people in Denver, but that was really cool. So she's a great lady. It was a lot of fun to talk to her again. And tonight I'm going to be on a show called Beyond. I think it's called Beyond Reality. It's with Jason Hawes, the guy who, the bald plumber guy who was on Ghost Hunters.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Ghost Hunters is over, but he's now doing a podcast, and so I'll be on that tonight. I don't know that he has much interest in UFOs or anything, so it'll be interesting to find that out. But I have met him before because in Denver, we brought him to do a talk out there about ghosts and stuff. So he's a cool guy. This ought to be really interesting. Another guy who, at least in the beginning, and I would assume still now, I mean, he felt like debunking ghost stories was a big deal. Same thing, because you need to figure out what it might be before you can say that it's actually mysterious. So that ought to be fun. But the big news. Ready for it?
Drum roll. Yeah.
Ben calls me, Hansen, who's going to be speaking at the conference. He's putting together his talk on president comments and UFOs because Obama, Clinton, Hillary Clinton all talked about UFOs on Jimmy Kimmel, Hillary Clinton, and other places. And he looks at their body language to figure out if they're telling the truth or lies or anything. And he's looking in details in the Podesta WikiLeaks and stuff like this. And he says, hey, you know that WikiLeaks that you're referenced in? And I'm like, what? And he says, yeah, you didn't even know this? And I was like, no. And he said, yeah, your story is in one of the WikiLeaks. So how cool is that?
I know. I saw that on your Facebook. I was like, holy moly. And I think that you commented something rather comical about that.
Yeah, he said something funny about it.
Yeah, he was teasing you. Yeah.
And we had speculated because when Jimmy Kimmel went on with Obama, Jimmy Kimmel had said something like, you're going to get analyzed, everything that you say here. People are doing that. And he was referencing Ben and Ben's work. And we know this because of a story in one of the major news outlets where this was highlighted. So, which is pretty funny. So we had, Ben and I had talked about who else is reading these. Do you think Hillary read it? Do you think Podesta read it and stuff like this? So this WikiLeaks is in regards to something I've already reported to all of you, which is that through the WikiLeaks, we see conversations between Podesta and Hillary's people where they were prepared for Jimmy Kimmel's questions about UFOs. And I hadn't poured through all of them because I got the gist and I saw, the theme. I should have looked further through because in one of these emails, it's really funny. So essentially, this email is forwarded to Podesta, and it's a conversation between Hillary and his people. And one of them says, okay, here's what I think essentially we should do with the UFO skit on Jimmy Kimmel. And this lady, Sarah Latham, she's a more, higher up, she's like, what are you talking about? Why would they want to talk about aliens? And so the other aide replied and said, well, Podesta and Bill Clinton have a history of talking about aliens. Here's some reference, here's some background on that. She posts some Mother Jones story and talks a little bit about it. And then she posts my story and talks as a reference for Bill Clinton's comments and talks a little bit about that. And my story was about Bill Clinton's appearance on Jimmy Kimmel and then Bill Clinton's history in relation to UFOs in Area 51, which included John Podesta. So, pretty
awesome.
Cool. They referenced me as and I read it and I thought, this would give him some good background on all of Clinton's, because I included everything, all the different comments he's made and everything. So, so that's really cool.
That is, you are a star, man.
Yeah, I don't do it just to pat myself on the back, but I mean, that's cool. I think
it is
cool.
Exciting. I mean, yeah.
I'm excited about it. But anyway.
Good exposure.
There's probably more important news out there. What news is out there, my buddy?
Well, this seems a little, not quite as exciting as your news. Not at all. But a Georgia witness describes a UFO chased by a military helicopter. Now, this happened in Cumming, Georgia. I'm not really sure exactly where that is in reference to the state, but he was watching a military helicopter, and it seemed to be chasing a tubular-shaped, glowing white object. That is pretty odd. You don't usually hear of something exactly like that.
Mm-hmm.
So this happened, it was back on December 2nd of last year, 2016, and it was about 7:22. He was sitting in his patio, on his patio in a hot tub. Now, you may think that's funny because everyone always teases me because that's where I had my UFO sighting, in a hot tub. And I wasn't drinking or anything like that. That's what they always ask. You were probably drinking. But anyway, he was facing south toward the back of his house, and he heard a faint chop, chop, chop of the helicopter. And a few seconds later, he saw a red light. He assumed it was a running light from the helicopter, but it was in the sky, and it emerged heading west. And so the chopper proceeded approximately 30 seconds, and he thought he would just get back to the hot tub, and then he started hearing the chopper again. And so it was considerably louder and moving very fast. And at this point, that's when he saw the object. And the thing was, this is a quote from him. When it passed by, the chopper was completely black, and there were no lights remaining from the cabin, just a red running light. And this is where it gets interesting. Just in front of the chopper, about 50 to 70 feet, was a tubular-shaped, glowing white object silently screaming by. And he knew that it made no discernible noise, and simply because the chopper was so loud, basically, in front of it. But interesting case. You don't hear a lot of things going on in Georgia. Okay, Cumming is a city in Forsyth County. I still don't know. It's not really that far away from Atlanta. It looks like about an hour or so away from Atlanta. But kind of an interesting one, a white tubular flying object. How about that?
Yeah, weird. That is a strange one. It's an interesting account. When did that one happen again?
That was back in, I believe it was December 2nd of last year.
Okay, yeah. Very interesting. A lot of strange things happen to you when you're in a hot tub.
That's true, yes.
One of our recent emails, I wrote about that, about how at our conference, it's not unusual to find some of the speakers in the hot tubs because most of them are from a colder area. And it's not unusual to find me in the hot tub. So you can hot tub with some of your favorite UFO researchers. And,
well, I'm a hot tubber, and a hot tubber, I don't know, that doesn't really sound good, but I got to tell you, I actually, when I tell you, the UFO sighting I had was pretty amazing, but the most amazing sight I ever had in a hot tub, and I was in my 20s, was a fireball. Never seen anything like the thing was breaking apart and turning as it was moving. It was like this big, huge thing just right over. It looked like it was right over my head, and I wasn't too far from the Atlantic Ocean, so I just assumed it landed in the Atlantic Ocean, only to find out that it landed in China.
Really? Whoa!
Or there was the same day, basically. It was nighttime for me, but daytime in China, and CNN reported it landing.
You need to spend more time in your hot tub.
So that was back in the 1980s.
Some amazing stuff happens to you in hot tubs. Wow.
I know.
I was a little worried when you said the most amazing sight I had in a hot tub. I was wondering where you're going there, but
yeah, I'm not going to get into that. But yeah.
Wow. Well, that's cool. That is cool. I've seen a really cool fireball that made the news too, but and that was incredible. So I can only imagine one that makes it all the way to China. So pretty cool. So did you see the other video that's posted? This was from December 23rd at about 5 p.m. This was in Canada and at Etsy's Bridge, where this guy videotaped a stationary light he said was making a growling noise, and then it quickly moved away. And it looks like, I guess it could be because of the noise it was making a drone, but it looks really high up there. And it's just sitting there for a while, and then it zooms off. So, and if it is a drone, it must be very high up in the air. And I mean, I don't know what kind of battery power these things have, but this was it's kind of a weird video. So did you see that one?
Yeah, I did, and it does seem to. First of all, a couple things about it. It's pretty bright,
Mm-hmm.
and it's an overall brightness, not like maybe drones can do that. I don't know, but it
Mm-hmm.
does seem to be moving fairly fast.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it is up, and it seems to flash, but that might be just an atmospheric thing. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems to be flashing or blinking, and it's sitting there for a little while before it kind of takes off, and not a streak of light, but it's moving pretty quickly. So yeah, that was kind of an interesting one too. So people should check that one out. You can check these all out at openmind.tv.
Righto.
Any more news, my friend?
Well, I do want to say something.
Okay,
And that
say
was
it.
about your last guest, MJ. Help me there,
MJ Benias.
MJ Benias. What a great show! If the listeners have not checked that out yet, I strongly suggest it. It was between Greg Bishop and this guy. I think of two of my favorite shows I've listened to
Wow.
this year. Really, really good stuff.
Yeah,
Well,
he was great. I had a lot of fun talking to him. He's someone I hope becomes more prominent in this field because I think he's a very intelligent young man. And yeah, I really liked it too.
level-headed and well-spoken. Very,
Yeah.
very good stuff.
All right, well, we are out of time and running out of time. I'm running out of battery power, so we better go.
Ooh.
But thank you once again for joining us. And let's go ahead and see what Kevin Randall has to say. I am very happy to welcome back to the show Kevin Randall. Hello, how are ya?
I am fine, and how are you? You're looking good, according to the picture I see here.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yep, that picture does me justice. It was a sunny day, and the Johnson Space Center where I got to do this media thing, and that's one of the rover things behind me.
Well, I saw the NASA symbol back there, and I was
Yeah.
impressed.
So that was pretty cool. But you have been pretty busy. I did the Paracast yesterday, and they said you were on it. And one thing they talked about was closing the book on Roswell, so we'll talk about that. But this article, I guess, or these articles have gone out about you, and they're claiming you're recanting or changing your view on Roswell. And however, I went to your site because none of these sites were referencing direct quotes from you. And I read you had written a blog about all of this. But I guess how did this all get started?
Poor reporting. Jerry Clark had asked for a copy of the. Actually, I sent Jerry Clark a copy of the manuscript to review, just to see if I'd missed something as I was writing the book Roswell in the 21st Century.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said if I could get him a review copy of the book. I don't know why I can't speak this morning. A review copy of the book. He would do a review for it, and I know Jerry would either do a very good review, or he wouldn't. If he didn't like it or there was something wrong with it, he'd tell me and he wouldn't review it. So he did a review that came out in 14 Times that said, and the headline said Roswell recanted.
Mm-hmm.
And all I really had done in the book, I went back and I looked at it as a cold case, and I tried to review the evidence that had been presented and look at it from a somewhat skeptical point of view, but a more dispassionate point of view. What can I divine from all this information I have? And distilled it into the book. So I was trying not to promote the extraterrestrial case or the mogul balloon case or anything like that. I was trying to present the evidence so that the reader, whomever it was, would be able to make up his or her own mind about where Roswell went. And Jerry said, and it's kind of basically in the book, said that I had stepped backwards from the extraterrestrial as the ultimate, yes, that's definitely what it was. What I really kind of said is, I don't know. The evidence, when we look at it dispassionately, is fairly weak. All we have are some testimonies and a couple of newspaper articles and an FBI telex that doesn't tell us much. And looking at it from that point of view, it's just not the robust case that we had thought it was in the 1990s, and I say we, Don Schmidt and I, when we began our research or as we progressed through our research, it just isn't that robust. But a lot of the really good testimonies, the ones that were exciting because we're talking about alien bodies, have blown up. The witnesses were less than candid in what they were saying. They contradicted themselves in the course of their statements, sometimes in the course of a paragraph, sometimes in the course of a sentence about what it might have seen or what they didn't see and that sort of thing. So it really comes down to testimony that was gathered at best 35 or 40 years after the fact, and some of it much later than that. And that's really all we have is this testimony. We have look for any documentation. And by documentation, I don't care whether it was a personal diary, a letter, something was dated from 1947. We can say, yeah, this thing mentions the UFO crash and the recovery of the craft and the bodies from somebody who was clearly in Roswell. We could put them in Roswell, something like that. A letter, a diary, a journal, anything like that. The closest we came was Inez Wilcox, who was the wife of Sheriff George Wilcox, who was involved almost from the beginning.
I'm going to pause you. Sorry,
okay,
just for a second. Something is brushing up against the microphone.
Oh, that's probably my shirt. I shall unbutton my shirt and move my collar, so it won't do that anymore.
Okay, thank you.
Anyhow, the closest we came was a article written by Inez Wilcox called 4 Years in the County Jail. She, of course, being the wife, was the matron of the jail, so it was kind of a play on the words. And there was a one long paragraph in there that talks about the flying saucer crash, but it's undated. The article itself is undated. This was an addition that she wrote sometime later because it says right on it ad, or ad A or ad 1 or something like that. It's an addition to the original story she wrote. So when she wrote the original story, the talk of the alien creatures, the talk of the recovery wasn't that important, so she added it to her. So the only thing I could do, since Inez Wilcox was dead, and we had learned about some of the stuff, and we actually got the document from a granddaughter, the only thing I could do is find out when she died. If she died prior to 1980, that would be great, because then she couldn't have written the thing after all the information about Roswell came out. But she died in 1989, so we really can't say that it was not in response to the publicity around the Roswell case. And I think about, while you and I, when this story broke, may have not paid any attention to it, although we were interested in UFOs, and when I say broke in 1980, I remember seeing a copy of the Roswell Incident book and figured it was just the Aztec case repackaged. So I didn't pay any attention to it at the time, but the people in Roswell certainly would have noticed it because their town was featured prominently in it, and I think family members would have been interested in it simply because their family members were mentioned in the book. So it really didn't do us any good because we couldn't put a date on it. And that's the problem. We don't have anything like that. You would think in 1947, I understand that it was classified. I understand that people were told not to talk about it, but that's still, somebody's private journal or private diary. I just can't believe somebody somewhere didn't write something down that could be dated, but we've never found any of that. I was talking to a woman a number of years ago, and she said that they had a diary, and it was out in their back house not back house, but their storage shed in New Mexico. So I'm thinking I'm going to go eventually down there and search through this thing, and talking to Tom Carey about it, and he said, yeah, he'd talked to her as well, and they had actually been there, and the shed is filled with scorpions and snakes, two of my very favorite things. And they couldn't find it, and it just seemed to be one of those stories that we get that went nowhere. We were told about photographs that had been taken in 1947 by a rancher or somebody, and it turned out they wouldn't tell me the last name. The source for this wouldn't tell me the last name, but he kept mentioning the guy's first name. The guy's first name was weird enough that I thought we may be able to find it. And I went to the county assessor's office and asked if they could sort their records by first name, their tax records by first name. They said, yeah, they can do that, which they did for me. And they came up with 3 entries. 2 were service stations, and one was an individual. And Don and I went over to his house, and we chatted with him for a long time, and it turned out he didn't have any photographs or anything like that. So, I mean, there's another lead that blew up on us. But that's the real point is, when we get down to the nitty-gritty, when we get down to searching for those sorts of things, we couldn't find anything. All we are left with is the testimony, some of it very, very dubious now that we look back on it. Bill Brazel talked to us. I don't think there's anything dubious about what he told us, and he talked about some of the things that he had found. Loretta Proctor would be the same way. I think that she might have incorporated additions to her story as they talked about it amongst themselves during the great explosion of Roswell interest in the early 1990s, which is not to say she was lying or confabulating. She was just adding details to her story that probably came from somebody else saying things. We know that Mac Brazel was held at Roswell for a number of days. How do we know? The Provost Marshal, Edwin Aisley, told me that, and he said he was held in the guest house. And Bill Brazel complained about his father being held in jail. And Marion Strickland, another
and Bill Brazel being the son of the first person who found the material.
Yes. Yeah, Bill
just
Brazel.
So we could keep everybody up to speed with us. So Bill Brazel, being the son, saying that his father was detained after he came forward, saying he had found this material. Yes.
And Edwin Easley, the provost marshal at the base, that's the top police officer. He was in charge, I think, of 2 different companies responsible for security on the base and things like that. I know, as my experience as an intelligence officer, I don't know whether it was the same back in 47. I also was responsible for gathering security clearances and all kinds of ancillary things like that I never thought of as an intelligence function. And given this was a larger organization, they may have had specific people who were responsible for those sorts of things. Although Jesse Marcel talked about doing security clearances, or the record shows he was doing security clearances and all that sort of thing. Anyway, the point simply is, Easley had said that Brazel had been held in the guest house. And Marion Strickland, who was wife of one of the ranchers out there, said that she remembered Mac Brazel complaining about being held in jail after he was released. Well, the guest house isn't exactly jail, but if you're locked in and you're not allowed to leave, it's virtually the same thing.
And this was the Army holding him.
Yes, the Army. Army Air Forces technically at the time, but we don't need to get that specific. But I mean, so we have that sort of thing, but we get back to what we're talking about is nobody interviewed Mac Brazel. He had died in 1963. We talked to the son, Bill Brazel, who has since passed away, and got a lot of information from him. We talked to Marion Strickland. So we looked at all of that sort of thing. And I mean, when we did these things, we either recorded it on audio tape or recorded it on videotape. So we have a record of what was said. But still, what we have basically is testimony, and a lot of it secondhand. I mean, Marion Strickland heard Mac Brazel talk about being held in jail, but she didn't observe him in jail. So technically, she's a secondhand witness. So when we get down to the bottom line in Roswell, where we are is we have testimony, but not the kind of robust testimony we wanted. Most of the people who talked about the bodies have been shown not to be telling the truth. The only one that I talked to personally that saw the bodies was a guy named Thomas Gonzalez, and he's about the only one that hasn't blown up in our faces. We've got others like Melvin Brown. The family talked about what he had told them, but again, it's secondhand testimony.
Well, what did Gonzalez tell you?
He just confirmed that he had been in Roswell in 1947, and he's in the yearbook, so there's no problem there. He was clearly there, and that he in the course of his duties on those days had an opportunity to see the bodies. I kept thinking of words, view the bodies, examine them. Now, he just kind of glimpsed the bodies in the distance. And what he had done for years and years afterwards is make little carvings of them. And again, we can't date those, but I have pictures of 5 or 6 of them that he had made, and so we have a picture of that. But I mean, so there's a guy who a first-hand witness to the bodies, but we didn't get a whole lot of information out of him. He said he was transferred off the base almost immediately after these events. You go back and look at the military records of the 509th Bomb Group, the guys at the base, and you see that their personnel, the number of people assigned to the base, didn't vary all that much between July of 1947, say August or September. But what we do find when we examine it more closely is a lot of people were transferred out and a lot of people were transferred in, so they're spreading the people out. There's a letter or a report by Edwin Easley again complaining that a large number of his military police have been transferred off the base after July of 1947. The problem is these guys were trained specifically in the security of the atomic weapons, and there weren't, that was, the 509 was the only atomic bomb group in the world at the time, and there was a lot of things that went along to guarding the weapons that weren't normal MP functions, because it was kind of elite. So what they were doing was transferring these guys out and bringing in new people. So you see the numbers of MPs didn't change significantly, but the people assigned to the base changed significantly. So there was some of that going on. But can you say, well, that's because of the craft falling, or was that because they were preparing for other companies, MP companies, to be guarding the atomic weapons in other locations? So it was kind of the trainers thing. The trainers were trained, and then these guys go out and they train the MPs in the next company, because the atomic force would be expanding. So you need people trained like that. So you can make that argument as well. It really wasn't a direct result of the Roswell case, but it was a direct result of what their training had been.
Well, see, that's why you're the perfect person, I think, to talk about all of this. Is that, first of all, well, for several reasons, you're more discerning than most in this field. That's what I really appreciate about what you do. You also have this military background, so you can be able to identify whether or not these actions were unordinary or indicate something strange was going on, which you're in a position where you can explain like what you just explained. So you can say, hey, this isn't as weird as it may look for someone who doesn't know how this stuff works.
And it could be just as weird as we think it is. It's just there is an alternative explanation that crosses right back into the mundane.
Right. I was going to say, it's like these witnesses that you have to be disciplined and not to get too emotionally invested or into what your relationship with these people, so that you can look take a step back and look at it and say, okay, now does this really give us any substance? Does this really give us a strong indication of something definitely happened? And others, I think, might not be as willing as you are to be able to say, hey, just because I like this person, I've got to stand back as a researcher or an investigator and say, what do I have here, though, out of what they're saying, and could they have made mistakes? And you have to be that careful with such extraordinary claims as are being made with this.
The best example of that is Walter Haut. I mean, here's a really likable guy. He helped everybody out. I don't know how many times I was in his house.
Background. Sorry, the background on him.
I was going to do that.
Okay, good. Yeah, I just want to make sure, because I don't want listeners to get lost, because there's so many different people.
But yes, there's like 1,500 players in this thing. But Walter Haut was the guy that issued the press release. He was assigned to the base. He's clear there. His picture's in the yearbook. He was the public information officer. He's the guy that wrote the press release, or released the press release, because he said at one time he wrote it, one time that it was dictated to him over the phone, one time that Colonel Blanchard, the base commander at the 509th, gave him the information. Anyhow, he was the guy that took the press release around to Roswell, and actually I think he phoned it in, literally phoned it in. He called the various media and read the press release to him over the phone. I think that's actually what he did. But anyhow, he became sort of the focal point. If you go to Roswell and you wanted to investigate the Roswell case, one of your first stops had to be Walter Haut. And he invited everybody in the house. They had a guest book in their living room that you would sign, say, keeping track of all the people who traipsed through their house, famous and infamous and unknown and known. And he was always providing information. And one of the people he pointed us at was Glenn Dennis, the Roswell mortician, the guy that had supposedly called to ask about, or was called about the small coffins and that sort of thing. And he gave us a number of names like that. But those leads seem to have blown up. I don't think Glenn Dennis was directly involved. I don't think there was a nurse. He was the one that came up with the nurse who had said that she'd been involved in some kind of preliminary autopsy out at the base and gave us a name, and we chased the woman for years. Never found her, and once we proved that the name he'd given us had never been a military nurse or a nurse in Roswell, he changed the name on us, blaming us for not remembering what he said. So, I mean, his story kind of blows up in that respect. Walter Hott is the guy that gave us the name. And I remember sitting in his living room and somebody told us about a mortician. And the first lead I had was that he worked at the library in Albuquerque. So I spent 2 hours in the library in Albuquerque talking to all the employees trying to find this guy. And I said something to that about that to Walter Hott. And we're sitting in his living room. And he says, "Oh, I know the name you're fishing for. It's Glenn Dennis." Well, obviously, we got to Glenn Dennis from Walter Hott, but if Walter Hott was being as candid with us as we thought, he would have never pointed us at Glenn Dennis, because it's clear that the Glenn Dennis story isn't true. And he should have known. Walter Hott should have known.
What about Hott's affidavit that was released after his death?
If you. Mm-hmm. And I explore this at length in the book. All of this is explored in the book in great detail. So if we got people who are really interested in the book or interested in the Roswell case, I need to take a look at the book, because all of it's laid out in detail with like hundreds of footnotes, so you can see where the information came from and that sort of thing. But
this sounds like one of the most important Roswell books to be put out, actually.
But Walter Hott, around 2000, Walter Hott had spent his entire life practically after we learned about the Roswell case saying, all I did was write the press release. All I did was issue the press release. That's my only involvement. I didn't see anything else. In fact, as I was doing the cold case review of information, I came across an interview that Walter Hott had done, actually the shooting script for an interview that Walter Hott had done in 1978 or 79, I think it was. And right in there, the director, the producer, or whoever is questioning him asked him about having seen the craft. And Hott says in there, I asked Colonel Blanchard about that, and he told me I couldn't see it. So, I mean, we have a very definitive statement where Walter Hott is saying, I asked about it, I was denied permission. He didn't have any need to see it. And he said to me, I don't know how many times, I didn't see anything. All I did was write the press release. So around 2000, he's being interviewed by a French TV crew, I believe, and they're talking about all this. And he mentioned seeing the bodies, but he wouldn't say anything about it on camera. He wouldn't talk about it on camera, but he did to Wendy Connor and I think Dennis Baltheiser, two UFO researchers in New Mexico. Said something about it, and they sat him down in front of a camera and got him to talk about this. It was going to be about his military experiences or his life story. And in the course of that, they got to the craft and the bodies. And he would say in the course of a paragraph, I saw one of the bodies and the craft was really beat up. No, I didn't see anything. I just wrote the press release. I mean, all in the same paragraph. Mm-hmm. And sometimes he saw more than one body. Sometimes he only saw one. Sometimes the craft was badly damaged. But it was all twisted and turned around in this rather confusing interview that they had conducted with him.
And how old was he by then?
He would have been in his 80s, I believe, by the time he started talking about that. And I don't want to say anything bad about old people and their memories, because I happen to be one now, which is very disheartening, by the way.
It's going to start going. Prepare for it.
Well, that's what they're going to be accusing me of now. But I think Don Schmidt, maybe with Tom Carey, certainly with Julie Schulzer, who was Walter Hott's daughter, sat down and they put together an affidavit. So somebody else wrote the affidavit from statements that he had made. So I really have no problem with Don putting together the affidavit. I mean, that's done frequently. Somebody else writes the affidavit and the person reviews it and then signs it. And that's exactly what happened here. But what we have here is not only the affidavit, we have all that other ancillary material that came out from other sources on audio tape, on videotape, or maybe on DVD now, or digitally recorded. But we have all of this, so we can see his confusion, we can see his confused state. So the affidavit is very crisp, very concise, and it's made up of statements he made. It's just that if you look at the history prior to the creation of that affidavit, it becomes less than sterling. You have to look at it in the context of who Walter Haut was, what was going on. I was of the opinion that he saw that as his legacy, and he was trying to establish his legacy. And
I think that a lot of people kind of maybe are a bit, they don't acknowledge the affidavit as important as it should be, because Walter Haut is making some pretty big claims. He saw a creature that had reptilian type of skin. He saw these bodies, all of this stuff that had previously not really come out. And I think a lot of people kind of are like, well, let's kind of put this aside. Just because it, like, as you said, it doesn't necessarily, it's dubious. It's very dubious.
And that's the problem. And the information is already out there. It's not like he was giving us information that hadn't been talked about. If you go back and you read all of the materials, Len Stringfield did his status reports, which was basically stories of crash retrievals and that sort of thing. All of that information is out there in the public arena and not hard to access. And in today's environment, it's even easier to access all of that information. So there was nothing that he gave us that was particularly new and spectacular. On the flip side of that, which is only fair to say, and I discussed this in a posting on my blog about the Walter Haut affidavit. I talked to a guy named Richard Harris, I believe, who had been a finance officer at Roswell in 1947. He's in the yearbook. Yeah, it's all verified. And he told me in the mid 1990s, long before Walter Haut talked about seeing bodies or anything, he told me that he had been in the hangar. And Walter Haut was in there, and Walter said to him, "Do you want to see the bodies?" And told him he'd just go through that door. Harris said he didn't want to, so he didn't go through the door. But the problem, and so this is a story that Harris tells me in the mid-1990s, and it is in conflict at that time with things that Walter Haut had said. I'm astonished that you would have the bodies laid out in a hangar and the doors wouldn't be locked. So that somebody just couldn't walk in, which is in essence what Harris would have done. The point simply is, here's a story told by a different source, unrelated to what Walter Haut had been saying all along. This suggests Walter Haut did have additional knowledge. So that's kind of the conundrum you run into. But the other thing you need to look at is, I interviewed him in his living room, and he had a bookcase, three shelf bookcase, and it was just crammed with books on UFOs. He had everything about UFOs in there. And so it wasn't as if he was a neophyte, as if he knew nothing about the Roswell case other than he had been assigned to the base in 1947, and clearly he was. So there you go. So you've got some corroboration from what Walter Haut says, but you have Walter Haut badly contradicting himself from what he had preached for decades. And then you have, in the course of discussing the bodies, you have him contradicting himself, saying that he'd seen them, and in the next paragraph saying, "No, I didn't see anything. I just wrote the press release." So you've got it when the stuff about the bodies and the crash came out from Walter Haut, he was very confused. I don't know how lucid is the term I was searching for. Lucid he was when he was making those statements, because I hadn't seen him in the last few years of his life when he had began talking about that. And this is the time when, my National Guard unit had been called up to go to Iraq and that sort of thing. So I was kind of out of the Roswell loop for a number of days there, a number of months, number of years there.
Yeah.
I had seen the one of the DVD, I think, that Wendy Connor had made. I did see that and noticed that he was highly confused during that, but that was really the only thing that I had seen, and I hadn't had any personal interaction with him after around 1999, and he died 5 or 6 years later.
And the hard part is, another difficult part is, we all like to think that our memories are not fallible, and they make up kind of who we are when we reflect back on our lives and different things that happen. We rely on our memories, and it's kind of scary to think that if those are kind of malleable. But studies have shown over and over again, more and more so these days, memory is so fallible, and we are so easily prone to suggestibility and false memory that often details of what we remember. That's why people sit around the dinner table at Christmas and they remember things, and the kids are rolling their eyes and saying, we all do this with our parents. That's not what happened. And, they're so certain of their version and you're so certain of your version. That's what makes memory and witness testimony, especially testimony that comes years after, difficult.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, and one of the things I've tried to do is the sinking of the Titanic. You had the witness statements, the survivor statements taken literally within hours of them getting to New York after the Titanic sank. And then you have their statements made 40, 50 years later. And we can compare what they said 50 years later with what they said at that time. And we find that there are huge changes. And it's all about, they're not really lying about it, but they've talked to other survivors. They've seen things, documentaries on TV. They may have read books about it. And as they do that, they incorporate that sort of thing in their memory, not consciously, but then it's become something that they remembered. And one of the big arguments about the sinking of the Titanic was it did break in two. And the witnesses who survived, the survivors, had two stories. It broke in two before it sank, and it didn't. And we now know the truth. It broke in two because we found both pieces on the bottom of the Atlantic. But the point simply is, even the people who were there and witnessed it weren't even sure exactly what happened until we could find the evidence. The one that kind of cracked me up was Bruce Ismay, who was the president of White Star Lines at the time, and he got into one of the lifeboats because he was basically kind of a creep. And when he was asked about how it sank, what did it look like sinking, and he said, I didn't watch. I couldn't watch it sink. And I'm thinking if I was Ismay, I probably wouldn't have watched it sink either. But the point simply is, you're absolutely right about memory being altered. And as people talk about what they saw, and they talk about it with other people, all of that kind of is incorporated in the memory. And then you can do just subtle things like talking about a traffic accident. Did you see the green car run the stop sign? Well, you've suddenly implanted subtly a memory that the car was green. It may not have been green, but you asked about the green car, and everybody said, well, there was a green car there. And so now the car changes color. The one thing I do remember, not Art McQuitty, Judd Roberts. Was talking about how they had tried to go out to the Brazel Ranch, and they were turned back by a staff car parked on the side of the road. And I just casually asked, and I don't know why, what color was it? And he said blue. Well, in 1947, it wouldn't have been blue, it had been green. Because the Air Force didn't exist in 1947. The cars weren't painted blue in 1947. They were painted that lousy olive drab green. So, but he became, the point is simply that the base became an Air Force base, and all of the cars were painted blue at that point. So in his memory, the car that stopped them so they couldn't get out there was blue, and clearly it would have been green. And I mean, is that a big deal? No, but it just kind of shows you how memory fools us
Right.
as we try to access this memory. There used to be the story that the memory was like a video camera. It records everything you see, and you just have to access it properly.
Mm-hmm.
And now we realize that memory is maybe like a video camera that's getting a lot of input and scrambling each other. And so
Right.
picking and choosing the bits and pieces that fit with your view of the world, not necessarily what actually happened.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jesse Marcel, of course, one of the most famous witnesses, if not the most famous, the first, intelligence officer to be on the scene and look at the material. He's the guy who came out, in the late 70s and said, that was not a balloon, it was a spacecraft. Now, he never said he saw any bodies, right? And
well, again, we go through all of this in the book in great detail for those that want to know it.
Mm-hmm.
According to Jesse Marcel Jr., his son, and they discuss this periodically, he never mentioned bodies. If Jesse Marcel Sr. had seen bodies, I am absolutely convinced he would have mentioned them to his son. And the reason I say that is Jesse Marcel Jr. told me the story that he once asked his father what the atomic bomb looked like. In 1947, the size, the shape of the atomic bomb was classified. I'm not sure why it was classified, but it was. And he said his father drew him a picture of what would have been Fat Man. If you remember the bombs dropped on Nagasaki, it was Fat Man, a big fat atomic bomb. And showed him it and then tore it into little pieces and set it on fire in an ashtray. So that would be the end of it. So Jesse Marcel Sr. shared stuff with Don that he wouldn't share with anybody else. I say all of this because after Jesse Marcel died, and as people were working on the case, other members of the Marcel family came out and said that Jesse had told them about the craft, or told them about bodies. I find those stories dubious. I just don't believe them. I know Don and Tom in their book, Witness to Roswell, relate some of those stories, as do I in Roswell in the 21st Century. But I look at it from the perspective as I find the stories very dubious. I would like to believe Jesse Marcel saw the bodies. I'd like to have robust testimony about that, but it simply does not exist. So Jesse Marcel, as far as I'm concerned, didn't see the bodies. He was on what we called the debris field, where there was metallic debris, but there wasn't a craft, there wasn't bodies. And I think that, there were, according to the best information, and this comes all the way from general officers on down, there was more than a single site. So it's like part of the craft fell on the part of the Brazel Ranch, and then the rest of it came down elsewhere. And that's where the craft and the bodies were. So Marcel didn't see those. Cavett, who went to the debris field with Marcel and Mac Brazel that Sunday evening, he was the counterintelligence officer assigned to the base at the time, and went out there and interviewed him a number of times. The only time I saw him get nervous was I had asked a question about the bodies, and he leaned forward, picked a magazine up off the coffee table, flipped through it, threw it back, and said to me, did Bill Rickett tell you that? Bill Rickett being his NCO, his a member of the Counterintelligence Corps in Roswell in 1947. Bill Rickett tell you that? And I wanted to protect Bill Rickett because Rickett was still alive, and I knew Edwin Easley had passed away at that point. So I said, no, Edwin Easley told me that. And he visibly relaxed. And I thought, oh crap, I just blew it. I should have said yes. Bill Rickett told me that and a lot more. But Cavett always maintained that there was nothing great about it. He said to me in that same interview, I asked him about collecting balloons, and this is before the Air Force got involved. And he says, no, we were too busy with our investigations to worry about recovering any balloons. So then we transport to 1995, and Colonel Richard Weaver is interviewing him for the Air Force investigation. And one of the questions he asked was about what it was, and Cavett says, well, it was a balloon. And my next question would have been, did you bother to communicate this valuable piece of intelligence to either Jesse Marcel, who was there with you, or to Colonel Blanchard, the base commander at the time? Because, we got the press release came out and said they had a flying saucer. but they just continue on from that point. So Cavett said that he didn't bother with any balloon recoveries or anything like this, but when he was questioned specifically about it by Weaver, he said no, he recognized it as a balloon immediately. And to my way of thinking, if you believe the news reports from 1947 that what Bill Brazel said, Mac Brazel brought some of the debris into the sheriff's office. So the sheriff calls out to the base. Jesse Marcel comes out and looks at it and says it's a weather balloon and goes back to the base and finishes his lunch. Instead, he comes out there. He looks at the stuff. He talks to the sheriff. He goes back to the base and calls the base commander, Blanchard, to talk about it. And Blanchard tells him, well, we got that new CIC guy. Take him with you, which, of course, was Cavett. So then they both go back to the sheriff's office, and they all trot out to the Brazel Ranch to take a look at the debris field. None of this makes sense if it's a balloon and the debris is in the sheriff's office. So we have problems with the explanations as well of what it was.
What if it was a mogul balloon? Would that explain if it was a top secret, balloon related to a top secret project?
Well, you have to divide this. The purpose of mogul was classified. The equipment and the launches in New Mexico was not classified. Even the name, even though they say, well, the name was highly classified and the people working on the project didn't know it. If you go back to Dr. Crary diary, Dr. Crary leading the mogul balloon project in New Mexico, in his personal notes written in 1947, I found 4 or 5 references to the name mogul. Well, the mogul equipment arrived, so it wasn't a big secret. They're using off-the-shelf weather balloons. They're using ray-wind targets that have been around for, I'll say, at least 2 years, because I know they were using them for artillery spotting at Okinawa during World War II. Weather bureaus use them all the time. The Albuquerque Weather Bureau, in fact, in a new article in the Roswell Daily Record in like July 10th, 1947, mentions that they were launching balloons with the ray-wind targets on it. There was nothing extraordinary about the balloons. The equipment was not classified. What they were doing in New Mexico wasn't classified. There was a story about it that appeared, I think, first in the Alamogordo newspaper, where they were doing their tests at Hulleman Air Force Base, which was Alamogordo Army Airfield at the time. There was a story in the newspaper with photographs of them with the balloons. In fact, Charles Moore, who was one of the project engineers with Mogul, told me that the picture showed a ladder as they were launching a balloon that he had bought with petty cash there in Alamogordo. So, there was nothing classified about it in New Mexico. It was just weather balloons and ray-wind targets. The only thing they did that would have been confusing was they strung them together in a big, long array that was like 600 feet long. And there would be 25 balloons linked together with 6 or 7 ray-wind targets, although I am convinced they didn't launch any ray-wind targets in New Mexico because they didn't have radar that was tracking the balloons. So anyway, they didn't... So there was nothing there that would have confused anybody. And when you bring in bits and pieces of the debris, you don't have this big field full of it to confuse you. When you bring in bits and pieces of it, you would have seen the balsa wood struts of the ray-wind targets. You would have seen the neoprene rubber of the weather balloons. You would have seen all of that stuff, and you'd have said, yeah, this is a weather balloon. I don't have time for this crap. And I'd have gone back out to the bay.
Right. So do you have any problems with Marcel as a witness? Because, of course, there have been questions raised.
Yes. I believe he liked to tell stories. There was a book done by Linda Corley, and she was a graduate student in Louisiana, living in Houma, Louisiana, which is where Jesse Marcel lived. And in 1980, I think it was, she went out to visit Marcel, and she recorded 4 hours of interviews with Marcel, and she did a book called For the Sake of My Country. And you read through the book, and you find Marcel making some statements that are a little bit embellished somewhat. He talks about, the one that really struck me was, he's talking about how he had performed a appendectomy, an emergency appendectomy on a soldier, getting instructions over the radio, and his wife kind of rolls her eyes and says, "Oh, not the appendix story again." So, I mean, I think he tended to embellish stories that way.
Sounds like an episode of MacGyver.
Well, he didn't have to improvise the scalpel and all of that stuff.
Right, exactly.
But
But yeah, it's something that's done in television quite a bit. But yeah, I see your point. So, I mean, it all comes down to, which is kind of, it's just like the fallibility of the human testimony. But it comes down to the base story, which was that this press release was sent out. Ramey did try to tell everybody it was a balloon, although, that was a cover-up. I mean, even the Air Force has admitted, okay, it wasn't the weather balloon Ramey said it was, but he was trying to hide some mogul. So, and according to you, that was not it either. So it's still a mystery, I guess. Is that how you feel?
Absolutely. I don't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd asked me 15 years ago, was it extraterrestrial? I said, oh, definitely, 100%, no question about it. You ask me today, I'm not sure. I do not know of a terrestrial explanation for it. I mean, we've looked at everything that I can find, from rockets and missiles gone astray from White Sands, which happened in 1947. They did go astray. Test aircraft dropping an atomic bomb by accident in New Mexico. I mean, even the mock-ups that they practiced with. And there was a story from the Albuquerque newspaper at some point in 1957, for example. The Air Force dumped an aircraft with an atomic bomb on it. I don't know if they dumped the aircraft or they accidentally dropped a bomb on Albuquerque, an atomic bomb on Albuquerque.
Yeah, that was, I guess, turbulence, and the guy fell on the lever, if I remember the article correctly, and dropped the bomb. Luckily, it was
an atomic
unarmed,
bomb
so
on Albuquerque.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't detonate, obviously. But the point simply is,
Yeah.
we know of that story. So, 10 years earlier, if they dropped one on by accident in New Mexico, we'd probably know it by now. They would, this is what happened, and all of that sort of thing. There is an interesting story that I know that has appeared. I think the guy's name is Newley, who talked about being a mechanic at Roswell after this event took place, but later in 1947, and he said that he had been we'd been in the hangar, and an MP came and chased him away. But before that had happened, he'd seen in the bomb bay of a B-29, he'd seen this thing that looked like had a big bulbous nose on it and tapered back, and they thought it might be the escape pod for the Roswell case. And the guy said, well, the guy said, I had the proper credentials. I should have been able to be there. And the problem with it is, and the clue is, it was a silver plate B-29. Silver plate was specially modified to carry the atomic bombs. And I think what the guy saw was a mock-up of an atomic bomb. And even though the guy had the proper line badge, and again, I had line badges when I was in the Air Force as an intelligence officer, and even though I was on the primary staff, and even though I was the intelligence officer, my line badge didn't allow me everywhere on the flight line. The only people that would have those kind of badges would be like the base commander and people like that. But so he was chased away from that, and the conclusion was drawn that this must have been the escape pod. I think it was a mock-up of a B-20 of an atomic bomb. And if you go to the internet and you look up the MK3 atomic bomb, I think it's the MK3 atomic bomb, you'll see it's got a big bulbous nose and it tapers on back. So what he was describing was an atomic bomb and not the escape pod from a UFO. So, I mean, we've got to search for those stories. And here again is, I think, a little bit of my military experience has come in, because I realized that even though he had a line badge, it wouldn't have allowed him everywhere. And since the size and shape of the atomic bomb was classified in 1947, he probably saw something that he shouldn't have, or got into a part of the hangar he shouldn't have, because he was allowed in other sections of the flight line. But the MP chased him away properly.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. This is something I'm curious about, because more and more we see these old FOIA, these old documents being quote unquote lost. So, for instance, John Greenwald has gotten some replies in the last year or so about the NSA documents that, were, and the DIA documents that were part of the cause releases of old files. and they were highly redacted, so they were mostly blacked out, and Stanton Friedman shows them all the time at his lectures. However, they say they've lost the originals, so they can't produce the unredacted files. Maybe we believe that, maybe we don't. There's the Kecksburg incident, other files that have been allegedly lost. Could it be that they truly are lost? Could it be that we never know because those records so long ago were just deemed as, well, this isn't important enough, nobody cares about this or is looking at it, maybe it's too weird or something, so the files are just burnt up and gone. And I mean, to that end, that would be a terrestrial explanation, meaning that, it was something that was insignificant. Of course, material that is otherworldly would be very significant. But if it's something like that where it was just so trivial to them, they figured, let's just bury this forever. Is that possible, you think?
No. Somebody would go to jail. Mm-hmm. When you're dealing with top secret materials, they have to be declassified. There are some secret documents that are stamped, downgraded at 3-year intervals, which means if it's a secret today, 3 years from now it'll be confidential, and 3 years from then it'll be for official use only, and then it'll be unclassified. And those documents are just routine documents. Top secret material is treated very, very differently. And what you have to do is, and I've destroyed many classified documents in my career as a intelligence officer, but for secret and above, you had to create a record of the destruction of that document. It had to give the title and the date, and I don't remember what information you had, but you had to produce, and we would, there were pages and pages of these things as we were going through to destroy. We'd fill out page after page after page after page and destroy, 25, 30, 40 documents at a time. And we were getting, that sort of thing. So there's a record of the destruction. If it's a classified document and it has not been properly declassified, and there should be a record of that, and it's just simply lost, somebody goes to jail. You can't lose classified materials that way.
But they are losing them. I mean, we've got many instances now where they say they've lost
them. And I'm
them.
saying somebody should go to jail. Unfortunately
nobody has.
I'm saying there should be a record of those documents. Mm-hmm. There should be a record of them somewhere. And I know that was one of the things when you say, somebody says, do you have a copy of X document? I say no. It was properly destroyed, and here is the record of its destruction. I personally destroyed this document. And I know I think with top secret, you had to have 2 guys on the sheet signing. I think for secret you only needed one. You had to have one commissioned officer. If it was top secret, you had to have 2 commissioned officers, I believe, or maybe just 2 people with the proper clearances signing off on the documents being destroyed. But I remember spending many hours at the Great Lakes Naval Air Station destroying classified material, and it was always a hoot because I would call out and I would say, "This is Captain Randall." And I was an Air Force captain, and they would get real excited because the naval captain is a really high-ranking guy, and an Air Force captain isn't much, and they'd get really excited. "Yes, Captain, what can we do for you?" "I'm over here at O'Hare," and they would say, "Oh," because they realized now I was an Air Force captain. But we would go over there and destroy the classified materials, and and the problem was we had to use these machines that basically pulped it. So that if you found a piece with a letter on it, you were doing really well. You turned it basically into lint. These machines did. The shredders we use, you can put the things back together if you have the time and the inclination to do so. So this was pulping the stuff. And that was the way we needed to destroy it. But we had records of it being destroyed. So if somebody came and said, "Do you have a copy of this document?" and I said no, they said, "Do you have a record of its destruction?" and I would say yes, and here it is. So if they're saying we've lost the documents, I am very dubious of that claim because it should be somebody going to jail.
Mm-hmm. Well, having said that, what's interesting is, especially with this resurgence with your the stories, the inaccurate stories going out about what you have said has kind of sparked this conversation again. And so many people, for some reason, have this feeling, And they get frustrated with Roswell, and they're like, we need to close the book on Roswell. This finally closes the book on Roswell. But having said what you said, you can never close the book on Roswell because stuff could still turn up.
But where do you look? Who do you talk to?
Well, that's the hard part. Maybe all the leads are gone, but something could still turn up.
And that's absolutely it. I've been preparing a piece for my blog about Roswell: The Next Step. And do we interview the grandchildren of the witnesses? Do we go back and we look at the unit history, which I've got microfilm copies of the unit histories, for crying out loud. How deeply there's nothing in there that gives us a clue. We look at Wright Field, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, all of that sort of thing. There's really no place to go here. All we can do is reevaluate the information and see if something pops up, and that's what I attempted to do with the book. One of the interesting things on my radio show on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, I got a chance to talk to a guy who had been in Project Blue Book at the very end. And so here's a guy, we got a picture of him standing there with Hector Quintanilla. So he's clearly with Project Blue Book, and I had a chance to interview him and talked about this and learned about how the investigation took place toward the end. And it's just not what we thought. It's just not where we are. But a lot of the stuff, I asked him about the classified materials because he had gathered a lot of the material. They were supposed to get rid of it, take it to the dump. And he thought some of the stuff should be preserved. So what he'd done is he'd taken a lot of the stuff home, and a UFO researcher, Rob Mercer in Ohio, found a box of this material for sale on Craigslist, for crying out loud.
Oh, right.
And went through all of that and got the box and realized who had collected it and managed to find the guy, this Carmen Morano, at his home, and talked to him and got more of the material. And so my question when I was interviewing him on my radio show was, about the classification. He said, none of the stuff is classified. So we get to the Blue Book and we're hearing about it's classified and all this stuff. And I've gone back now through a number of the microfilms and looked at it, and very few of the documents have any classification on it at all. The only thing they were worried about is revealing the names of witnesses, because they had promised witnesses in the course of their investigations they wouldn't release their names so people would know about it. So that's why they went through and tried to redact all the names. They did a lousy job at that, by the way, and the information is out there. And I guess Rob Mercer told me that he had a complete index of the Project Blue Book files with all the names in it. The copy I've got, their names are all redacted. I've got a complete list of all the witnesses, because Bob Cornett and I had a chance to look at the Project Blue Book files while they were at Maxwell Air Force Base before it was all redacted. And one of the first things we did was go through the index and write down the case and all the witnesses for it. So we were able to put the names back in. I think Don Berliner had done the same thing, and I think Brad Sparks has done something of similar nature. And so we could put it in, but Mercer's got everybody's name. And you go through the cases, and there's just some really laughable things on the Arnold sighting, the Kenneth Arnold sighting in June of 1947. They even went to the extreme of blacking out Arnold's initials. It's the KA. They'd black those out, and on one of the interviews, it's got written in grease pencil across the page in letters at least an inch high, Arnold sighting. So
that's funny.
So it's there, and they would have newspaper clippings, and so you could put the names back in through the newspaper clippings that went with the file, so you could put the names in. But Mercer's got a complete set of that. But the point simply is, some of the things we thought about the Air Force investigation aren't true, and the classifications have been jumbled, and things weren't as highly classified as we thought. The same thing with Mogul. The ultimate purpose was classified, but the stuff going on in New Mexico wasn't classified. So the point is, there's no place to go with the Roswell case here and now. There's no place to go other than to review what we have. And sometimes a cold case review brings information forward, but we're kind of stuck on that right now. And as I said, that was the point of Roswell in the 21st century, is do the cold case and try to put all that information into a single resource that may lead somebody else somewhere, because I'm not sure where to go with it.
Yeah. Well, and then you have Tom DeLonge alluding to possibly this McCaslin guy who used to work at Wright-Patterson Research Laboratories, was in charge of them. He implies, he certainly has talked with him, we know this from the Podesta WikiLeaks, but he implies that this McCaslin told him about a recovered alien body, and Tom DeLonge even told Podesta, this is the guy who was in charge of the labs where they sent the Roswell material. So I don't know that that's going to lead anywhere, but that type of person could be out there.
Well, the thing is, there was an FBI document, the Huddle memo, that shows up periodically, and everybody says, "Here's the proof. Here's the proof." We've had the memo for like 8 billion years, and it refers to the Aztec crash. Doesn't refer to Roswell, although it doesn't say that, but it's clear he's talking about the Aztec crash. And here's an FBI document. All it is an agent heard this story and he put it in a memo and sent it to the FBI. He didn't try to verify the information. He didn't do any further with it. He just creates this memo, and it, like I said, it resurfaces all the time as the documentation, but we know what it relates to and we know where it goes. So it really doesn't lead us anywhere.
Yeah. So we'll see, but at least your book is an example of work regarding Roswell that should and needs to be done. So I'm excited about your new book. Is it out?
Oh yes. You can go to Amazon right now this minute, and as an ebook, you can have it on your iPad or your phone in like 10 seconds.
All right, I'm going to do that.
The only problem, you also can get a hard copy. The only problem is, and I'll tell you this, is that the footnotes in the ebook are all at the end of the book, as opposed to being on the page. In the hard copy, it's all the footnotes are at the bottom of the page. So, it's hard to flip back and forth between the footnotes when they're at the end of the book. The other thing is there's no index in the book, but I did do a blog. I did put an index on my blog, so if people want an index for the book, and it relates to the hard copy again, but it's you go to www.kevinrandle.blogspot.com and you just type Roswell index into the search engine, and it should take you right to the index for the book. So it's available so there's an index available, but it's out and about, and people can access it immediately.
Perfect. Well, now if listeners run across these stories that say Kevin Randle says Roswell is phooey, they've got the word from you on what your real thoughts are. And I just can't believe, I don't know if it's been shocking to you, how many of these stories have gone out and not one of these people contacting you.
Yeah, that's kind of surprising, and it's not like I don't have a large presence on the web.
Yeah, you're very accessible.
And that sort of thing, but nobody's ever bothered to ask me about that, and it's just sort of the headline that I think it came out of the Fortean Times and Jerry Clark's review, and if you read the review, it says basically, I'm not sure anymore that it's extraterrestrial. That's still a very distinct possibility, but the evidence isn't as robust as it once was, and that's where we are. And I've tried to put all the evidence in the book so that people can make up their own mind.
But I still feel it's a great and one of the most important cases. I would imagine you still feel that way. I mean, even regarding other great cases, Rendlesham or here the Phoenix Lights or others, Chicago O'Hare, we don't know that any of those incidents are related to extraterrestrials, but we know there's some sort of very strange occurrence that took place.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we've gathered all the evidence on the Roswell case that we can. And so now we need to evaluate the evidence, but we also have to see how it ties into the rest of the UFO phenomenon and see if it relates specifically to it. I have heard somebody has an explanation for it that comes out of some kind of government secrecy, but I have not seen the evidence for that. So I don't know exactly what that might be and where it might lead us. And it might lead us to the extraterrestrial for all I know, but we don't have that. But there might be something out there. But at this point, I'm just not sure where to go and what to do with the Roswell case.
And I guess my last question, because just for any people who are curious, and I know your answer because a lot of these people have said, a secret Japanese test where they floated something over here and they're little Japanese people, or that there were, it was Nazi or that it was Russian and there were these Mongoloid people in them, stuff like this. I mean, none of those are have much veracity to
I
them.
see nothing that takes us to Roswell. I mean, we can find, if we go through the records, we go through the information that we have, we can find the reasons to discount that. If the Nazis had some sort of flying saucer, it would have gained complete air superiority like immediately, and things like that. It just doesn't make good sense, and the documentation is very, very weak on that, to the point of being nearly non-existent. I know argument erupted on my blog a year ago about it being a Tu-4, which is a Tupolev bomber the Soviets had created, which is basically a B-29. During World War II, I think four of them had landed in the Soviet Union, so they had four complete B-29s. And they duplicated it right down to its rivets. So they designated it Tupolev 4, and somebody said, well, it was a Soviet B-29 that they'd flown to Roswell to prove that they had the capability to reach the interior of the United States. And you go back through the records and you can find, well, that's just simply not true. It's not even an interesting theory. It's just nonsense to clutter the landscape for 10 or 15 minutes.
Right.
I guess by internet trolls, we would say. And but I mean, we try to look at that stuff and tried to look at that stuff to see if there was anything that was viable there, and we just never found anything that was viable. The closest anybody came was Project Mogul, and I think the evidence, the documentation, rules it out. But that's my opinion, and every time I say that, I end up hearing from all the skeptics and the debunkers telling me why I'm wrong on that. And so don't bother to write, because I know I'm wrong, so just leave me alone. But the documentation pretty well rules it out. So kind of there we are. We're left really with no explanation for what it was, and you can use that as a springboard in the extraterrestrial if you want. I don't really want to do that, but my inclination is to suggest it may well be extraterrestrial, but the evidence isn't there to prove it.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. Thank you so much for coming on with this conversation. This is a lot of fun, and I immediately wanted. We haven't even mentioned that this is an anniversary for the event.
Yes, we have.
It's the 70th.
Yes, we did not mention that, and I'm sure they'll have a big festival in Roswell, and a lot of people will go.
Yeah, I'll be there speaking. But you haven't been to Roswell to do a talk for quite some time?
I haven't been since 2012.
Yeah, that's too bad. You should be there every year.
If they invite me, I would make an endeavor to go, but unfortunately, my health might prevent me from getting down there. So,
oh no!
It's not. Okay. It's nothing deadly. It's nothing. It's nothing fatal. It's just that it's very difficult to travel long distances.
Oh no! All right. Well, I hope you feel better, and we'll be in touch.
Hey, be sure to be in touch, for crying out loud.
Will do. I'm at your blog a lot, so I feel like we're in touch frequently.
Well, I go to open minds frequently too, so we're even on that point.
All right, we'll talk to you later.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much to Kevin Randle for joining us once again. I think that this analysis of the Roswell situation is very, very important and interesting. I still feel, like I talked about with Kevin and Martin, and the guys on the Paracast, Gene and Chris, and oh man, there was another guy on there, and I forget his name right now. Great guy. But that the Roswell case, is maybe there's lulls, but it never seems to go away, and not because people just keep rehashing old stuff, but because sometimes new discoveries or new things do happen, and so then you have to review it again. And that's not a bad thing. So a lot of people get really tired of hearing about Roswell, and maybe you're one of those people. But hopefully we gave you an example of how you never know what's going to happen. I mean, we talked about these Tom DeLonge things. Who knows if there's something there? Only time will tell. So we'll see. Anyway, Thank you very much to Kevin. Be sure to check out his blog. It's called A Different Perspective, and you can just Google Kevin Randall and you'll be able to find it. Really great stuff. Very interesting. When he covers something, he's going to put kind of a filter on it that is very critical, which is important. And as he talks about, anecdotal information is one thing, but hard data and content of that anecdotal information and the way it corresponds with other testimony is really, really important. First, for the veracity, but second, to also really get a good idea of what the heck happened. If you don't have a narrative that is consistent among your witnesses, how can you really, understand or have faith in what might have occurred in any given situation? So all of those things are just very, very important considerations, and Kevin is great in taking all of those things into account. So as you can tell, I'm a big fan of Kevin's work. So thanks again to Kevin for joining us on the show. Thanks also to Martin Willis. Like I said, you can listen to him with, I always forget the name, and I just am too forgetful. But the Metabunk guy, the guy who wrote the story about the Chilean craft, be sure to talk or listen to Martin talking to this gentleman about that. Also, I occasionally do other podcasts. I get busy with creating or posting news and stuff like that, so I'm not always able to. But especially this time of year, I want to help promote the UFO Congress and all of the great speakers that we have. So I'll do more of these shows. So the Paracast, I always like going on with them. As I talked about, I was on there. I was on a global perspective, or global newsmaker focus with Patrice Sheridan, who's on KGRA, so check that out. And then also airing tonight, I was talking with Greg Bishop about this Chilean case and more in the UFO Congress. Greg Bishop will be a speaker at the Congress, and I'm very excited about that. And also, we talked about all of this stuff. So I really love talking with Greg Bishop. As you heard Martin say, he's one of his favorites. And so it's going to be great to have him at the Congress as well. So check those programs out when you get a chance. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining our program every week. Right now, I don't have anyone slated for next week, but that'll probably change. I'm sure I'll get someone on. Like I keep saying, I keep warning you guys. I know this time of year it gets a little dicey for me because we're so busy with the conference. It's only a few weeks away, February 15th to the 19th, and so we're just so swamped with getting prepared for that sometimes it takes sometimes I need to spend more time on other people's show than working on my own. So I can't guarantee we'll have shows from here until the Congress, but we'll probably have one or two still. But I do my best because there's always so many great people to talk to and so many interesting topics to cover. So I just want to give you that warning. As for the Congress, a lot of exciting things going on. The one thing I want to tell you is this week is the last week to order discounted tickets online. So if you want to order tickets, you got to go online and do that this week if you want the discounted price. Now, a lot of people like to come buy tickets at the door, which is fine. Sometimes people aren't sure of their schedule, so they need to come to the door. In fact, most people seem to buy their tickets at the door. But I just like to, like I always do, I give you guys a heads up on everything. So I want to give you all the heads up that this week is last chance to get the tickets at the discounted price. We've got a great crowd coming. We've already got a lot of media attention. We're going to have people from TMZ there. I'm not sure if it's going to show up on their regular TMZ, but they're doing a special kind of other program. People Magazine, Now This News, if you've heard of that. A lot of the local news channels, and I'm hearing more and more from different news agencies on a regular basis. So as usual, we're going to get a lot of coverage from mainstream media as well. So that's always fun and exciting. I know I'm forgetting a few others, but that's always fun to have those cameras around and have them interviewing people and getting them excited to talk about some of these very credible people that will be speaking, people like a professor from Norway, on their decades-long investigation, or people like a neuroscientist talking about alien abduction. For goodness sakes, what's up with that? Some colonels. And then, of course, we have people like Yvonne Smith, a therapist, and they're always really excited in this. We have crowds of people in the morning and the evenings that come into these group sessions with Yvonne where they share their experiences. And that's always very popular. And it's amazing how many people get involved with that. And I think that's always shocking that it's not, one-offs. It's not just one person here or there that is seeing something they can't explain, nor is it just one person here or there that is having experiences where they believe, they've maybe been in contact or met something from elsewhere. It's hard for people to get their mind around, but there are a lot of people that feel they have these experiences, a lot of them very credible people that, we would take seriously given their credentials and demeanor had they been speaking about something more prosaic. So it's always a lot of fun. The media is always really interested. And thus far, the media we've talked to, is interested in the topic, not just in teasing and stuff like that. Also, for the film festival, we have a lot of great films. This is really interesting. I want to talk about one of these films that we've got in the film festival. It's with Major Ed Dames. Now, he was, the CIA released all of these files recently. They were actually files that are mostly already out there. In fact, these were accessible through a computer system that they had in Washington, but you had to physically go there to get to these files. Somebody who contributes to OpenMinds.tv often, Shepard Johnson, had actually written a story about this and taken some pictures, and we got those on the website. He wrote about this computer system like last year, and now finally they've put all those files online. So it's a lot of files we were aware of, but the news is really picking up on this Stargate program. Something John Alexander knows very well, the colonel who will be speaking at our conference, these remote viewers who remote viewed things for the military. It's like a psychic gift they think everybody has. And Major Ed Dames was one of those people. And he and others, we had Joe McGonigal, who I think is probably, one of the most credible people that was in that group. Ingo Swann was the psychic who helped start this group. And all of these guys have been asked to remote view UFOs, and they see aliens, and they think there's an alien presence here. I mean, they believe some pretty wild stuff. And they believe this because of information they feel they received through this remote viewing. So it's really wild. I don't even know what the heck to make of this. But one of these films that we're going to be showing at the film festival, and you'll be able to see this at the UFO Congress website, you'll be able to see information about it this week as we put up the people who will be part of the film festival. But this is interesting. It's Major Ed Dames talking about his findings this way, UFOs and ETs and stuff like that. So it's just fascinating that these remote viewers feel like they've obtained this information. Government, military remote viewers. The world is a strange place, people. It is flippin' weird. I don't have to tell you that. Just turn on the TV and you'll find that out in a heartbeat these days. Wild, wild stuff. So this will be a lot of fun. This will be interesting. Even if you don't make it to the Congress, you'll be able to find information out about all of these films, see who wins, some great stuff that'll be involved in the film festival. And if you're coming to the Congress and you want to judge the films, you can come a day early. Come on Tuesday. We show the films all day Tuesday, and that's when judging takes place. Now, if you can't come on Tuesday, we still have the People's Choice Award. The judging for that takes place Saturday evening at the awards banquet. So those are the two ways you can be involved as a judge for these films, and we'll see who wins. It's always exciting to find out who will win the EBE Award for 2017. Very prestigious award. People put those laurels on their DVDs, and it's a really important, special type of thing. So this is going to be a lot of fun. That's what's going on right now at the UFO Congress. You can check out the latest at the website ufocongress.com. Do I have anything else to say about the Congress? Not at this moment that I can think of, but I will probably regret not mentioning something as soon as this show is done, because that's commonly what happens with me. I forget stuff as I age, and my brain turns to mush. Unfortunately, happens to all of us. Happens to the best of us. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Thank you to Caleb Hanks, who does the opening and close music. Also, thank you to the gentleman out there who listened to Google Play, and he said, hey, why aren't you on Google Play? And we used to be like Google Play when they started. They like took all the podcasts. They went and sought them out. But now, of course, just like everybody, iTunes, everybody, you have to go through their process to get on Google Play. But I went through that, and now we're on Google Play, so you can find us there. I'll put a link on the radio page because I don't know if we're searchable on Google Play yet. But, so if you use that for listening to your podcast, you'll be able to do it, our podcast through Google Play soon. I think we're on everything else. We're on Stitcher. We're on iTunes. We're on just about everything else out there. So this was just the final one, I guess. So thank you so much for letting me know.